Hello, everyone. I'm Mabel Chan. Welcome to my podcast, One in a Billion, part 3 of our special series, Find Your Roots. Find Your Roots is about Asian American mothers and daughters, fathers and sons, looking back at the roots of their family history, cultural identity, and personal journey, one person at a time.
My name is Paul Lee.
Paul Lee is first-generation Chinese-American born in Massachusetts.
I was born in Somerville, 1964. I am the last year of the boomer generation.
Paul is the youngest son of Sen Lee and Boy Lee, who founded the Hong Kong restaurant in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1954.
So I grew up in Cambridge, not far from the restaurant, but it's very far from my culture, my roots. My parents were from Canton, China. I don't know exactly where. They tell me that it's Wuntun, and I don't even know if I pronounced that correctly.
Paul spoke the Toisan dialect with his mom and dad at home and at work. For over 50 years, Paul has worked tirelessly in this traditional Chinese restaurant, keeping his parents' American dream alive. Next year, the Hong Kong Restaurant and Lounge, a Harvard Square landmark, will celebrate its 70th anniversary, a big milestone. Now, Paul wants to honor his parents' immigrant journey and incredible grit by tracing their past.
I want to know what happened. I want to know how some of our family members made it over, how they didn't make it over. I want to know about our history, our personal history.
Here's our conversation. So, Paul, when I first came across your Hong Kong restaurant, it was in the 90s. All I knew was, let me just poke my head in and see if I could find my favorite dish. So my favorite always, when it comes to Chinese food, is congee and noodles. What is your favorite dish?
It has to be chow fun.
Oh, what is that?
The beef chow fun, the wide rice noodles.
Yeah.
I love that. My parents would bring me into Chinatown growing up, and that's where I would get it, and I always loved it. That's what I'd always get when I went into Chinatown. That and the wonton noodle soup.
How about your parents? They're from Canton, so congee is a big thing.
Yes, absolutely. So we'd have it periodically.
Now, have you been to Hong Kong?
I have not. Unfortunately, I have not been to China. And I feel I have to go back, but I'm somewhat reluctant because I don't speak Mandarin. And I know that everybody speaks Mandarin there.
So who named Hong Kong and why?
Oh, geez, I don't even know that answer. My parents started in 1954, before I was born, and it's always been the Hong Kong restaurant. So my father was born in 1915, in September of 1915, and my mother was born in December of 1925.
I see. So they're 10 years apart.
Yes.
They were born in Canton.
Yes.
Southern China bordering Hong Kong. So I don't know if you did any sort of digging around the Chinese history in 1910s, 1915 for your dad and 1925 for your mother. China was in a warlord period.
I don't know a whole lot. I have to say I'm sort of embarrassed to say that I don't know that history. They've never really talked about their history. I know my mother talked about growing up in a small village, and she would have to go down. She was the oldest of the family. She would literally carry the buckets of water on her shoulders, go down to the river, get the water and bring it back. And she was the oldest. She had to take care of her family, so she helped out. She said she dropped out of school in the 6th grade, maybe.
And your father?
My father, he never really talked about what his youth, those years were like. I know that he came to the U.S., he fought in World War II, so he had to be at least a naturalized citizen at that point. But I don't know when he came over. I am trying to find out more because I know that my grandfather is the 7th in line, one of 9. Some came to the U.S., some did not come to the U.S., some never want to come to the U.S.
I will say that I resonate. So I grew up in Hong Kong also. My mom also came from China, and I wanted to know, and she never said a word. China was going through the Cultural Revolution in the 60s and the 70s. Hong Kong was almost like the first stop for refugees. The mid-20th century, for whatever reasons that people would flee from different parts of China to stop in Hong Kong. So it's extremely difficult. That's why we don't talk about ourselves and our history.
Well, I do have to say that the Lee side of the family we are trying to put together a tree of the relatives. And so they are having Zoom meetings and talking about different lines of the family. The different people are talking about some of their history. And unfortunately, it's on Saturday, and I'm not able to listen, but we've had a couple of Zoom meetings, and I do want to, at least at some point, listen in on one.
That sounds great. What does it mean for you that they're now doing the family tree? How does it make you feel?
I always feel that we get together at weddings and funerals, and that's it. Every time we get together, I see someone and I think, oh, I know this person. Oh, yeah, that's your cousin. And so we always talked about, oh, we should put together a family tree. And so they're slowly gathering all the information, kids, family, where they are, and it's all on a Facebook group. We go in and we can check it out, and we try to bring other people that we talk to.
I wonder to what extent at this stage in our lives, we just have to find out more. Otherwise, we are not here.
That's right.
You agree?
Absolutely. If we don't learn more and we don't tell the next generation, everything is completely lost. You don't want that. You want them to know where they came from. The thing that's sort of driving us now is we never talked about where we came from, what happened. But now we have to. We have to let people know that this is our story, or else it's just going to get wiped away.
Why do you think your parents picked Harvard Square in 1954 to put down their roots in terms of a business? Whose idea was that?
I don't know how they got to Harvard Square. I know the story of continuing to be in Harvard Square.
According to the Harvard Square Business Association, your mother was the one with a lot of business ideas.
Yes, she was. It was funny because my mother always said that my dad was the worker and she was more like the thinker.
Do you agree? Have you seen that?
Absolutely. But my mother worked just as hard as my father, but I think she was the one more directing.
And entrepreneurial, really opportunistic. I do find that is a common thread with people from Hong Kong or Canton. It might have been the history of working with people from the West and trading with them. So those life events can affect your gene mutation that you pass down. It's called epigenetics. I did grow up in the family business as well, even though I did not do business. Those entrepreneurial thinking about let's do this, let's do that comes up.
Absolutely. My mother's family, all very entrepreneurial. My aunt had a few restaurants. Another aunt had a restaurant. Another uncle had a restaurant and a provisions store and a supermarket.
Now, according to the Harvard Crimson interview that I read, your mom picked out that spot for a Hong Kong restaurant because of feng shui.
Very smart, very smart. She would all of a sudden like, oh, we have to move this, or we have to move that, or we have to put this here, or we have to put that there. She would have someone come in and they would move things.
Do you know why? Is that rooted in Buddhism or any other religious belief, spiritual practice?
I think it was all of the above. She just believed in all of this. I think it was later in life, as she got older, we would buy sin and put the offerings out with the chicken and the vegetables and oranges and burn the incense and the tea and everything like that. And so I still do it today.
So Cantonese would be bai san, right? So English would be like worship the gods. Are they nodding to the ancestor?
Absolutely. We have at the house 8 different altars. And we burn incense. And one is for the ancestors.
Did she ever explain what that is about? Did you ever ask?
I asked, and she never gave me a good explanation. She just said, do this.
And Paul followed the example, working hard at the restaurant since he was just a kid.
I've been washing dishes since I was 8 years old. So that would be almost 50 years now. Working the front desk when I could barely see over the counter. And people would so nicely give me back the money when I gave them too much change. It was fun, except for Saturdays when I wanted to watch cartoons and my father would bring me to the restaurant and make me clean the bathroom and clean wherever I needed to clean.
But when it comes to Paul's college education and career direction, it was entirely his choice.
I went to Clarkson University and graduated in computer-based management systems, which has absolutely nothing to do with the restaurant business.
And here's a turning point that happened the night of his college graduation.
My mother and father came to my college graduation, and the night of the graduation, my father had a heart attack.
Oh.
So he still survived. That was in 86, so there was another 8 years. He lived another 8 years. But I said, I don't have a job right now, so why don't I just come back to help out?
You felt a sense of duty. Your dad just had a heart attack. You felt that you needed to be around him.
I had to come back and help out. Growing up in the restaurant, it was just a natural extension, absolutely.
What was challenging about the business then and now? How did you see it different?
We're right across the street from Harvard University. The kids turn over every 4 years. And then you have the business school and the law school every 2 years, every 3 years. People are constantly coming and going. So you have to keep up with them.
Adapt to their taste.
Absolutely. You start out with your menu and then you just sort of keep tweaking along the lines. One of the things that I thought was a great idea was to do catering larger trays. We never did that before. A lot of people are asking for like group events. And so I said, we should just try this. And that was 10, 15 years ago. Now you get catering orders every week.
Your business, Hong Kong, had been around since 1954.
Well, my mother, she was smart enough to buy the building. And, I think that's why we're still around.
Your parents built this as a legacy, and they're clearly honored and loved by the community, Harvard Square. Talk to me a little bit more about how the community showed their love and respect for your parents, and how does it make you feel?
My mother got one of the Cornerstone Awards from the Harvard Square Business Association. The plaque, the headstone that's across the street from the restaurant was put up by the city honoring my father. And, we've been around for so long. We know so many people. People come in all the time. Oh, my parents were here. We had our first date here, things like that. Back in the 70s, people would actually have their wedding banquets up on the third floor. Back then, we had the round tables and we had the murals and overhead lighting, and we could easily seat 80 to 100 people up there.
Your parents, what do you think is at the root of why they want to keep going with the business, even though, it ebb and flow?
It's all they knew, and they just kept doing it as long as they could. And I sort of feel like that's a lot of Chinese people, just continue to do what they do, and they're happy with it.
Are you happy with continuing with the family business? Is there a specific commitment that you've made to them or to yourself?
I always thought of it as they've put the sacrifice in. They've built the sort of foundation of the restaurant. And I always thought that it was my goal is to sort of build on top of think of it as a foundation of a house and to just build up to the first floor or the second floor, So that's sort of how I thought. But I have to say that COVID has made me change sometimes.
In what way? How are you thinking about developing?
Now I'm thinking about more quality of life. I've heard too many stories about people working right up until the point they died. And it's like, why do you have to do that?
Well, because of the next generation. Was it clear to you that they were doing this for you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. They did it for us. There's 3 of us.
And then how are you thinking about it?
We have no kids. My sister really isn't too involved. She comes to work a few days a week. None of her kids are involved. My brother, he runs the Faneuil Hall location, and his son is running the location. But everything is changing so much. I always say that my parents could outwork anyone. Mm-hmm. And that was what you needed to succeed back in that time. I say now that you have to have that work ethic, but you also have to be very, very smart.
Adapting to the new market possibilities.
Absolutely. I don't know if they would have survived in this time when they were running the restaurant, when they, my mother didn't speak any English. She would look at the books and no one would help her. Had to figure out what was happening. the prior month to try to figure out what was this month and how to do things.
I love it. Well, but the books, were they written in Chinese so that she knows the expenses and the income?
No. It was just numbers. She figured it out herself. She really was very, very smart. Her whole side of the family, all very entrepreneurial, all very smart. They were very good with people in terms of relationships. We got old documents. My father spoke English. We had a loan from Cambridge Savings Bank back in the 50s. They were smart people. They knew someone and they helped you.
Watching how they interact and win people's trust. Watching how they build the business from nothing. What have you learned from their experiences that have become your style?
One is just hard work. They were there every day. I got a bit of that when I was growing up. My father would bring me down to the restaurant and he'd have me clean the bathrooms or clean the under the walks or clean the floors. I always think that I would never ask an employee to do anything that I would not do myself. That's what they taught me. How can you ask someone to go clean the floor if you weren't willing to do that yourself?
That is very true of the restaurant business in particular, right? You roll up your sleeves and you roll with it.
Absolutely.
Wow. And then how about did you observe any kind of mistakes that you wanted to avoid watching your parents and any guiding principle of how to run a business by watching or them verbalizing to you?
They were always worried about business. Sometimes if someone came in and, may have been a little drunk, but they would want food, and I would think, there's no way we should serve this person food. And then they would anyway. And now I find myself doing the same thing.
Oh, right. It's out of compassion.
Compassion, business sense. Some people that come in and say, listen, I have no money. And so you feel bad for them. And sometimes I'll just grab them a box of rice and say, here you go.
Did your parents do that as well?
Yeah, they absolutely did. They were always welcoming. Cambridge has always been so good to us. We need to sort of give back. Some of the organizations come to us and say, we need donations, we need food or whatever. And I try never to say no.
Because they gave your parents an opportunity, right? Which was in the 50s, right? You were born in the 60s. But from what you gather, you mentioned sacrifice. What did you see that's still stuck in your mind?
I see my father get up, go to work, come back, get up the next day, just go to work and just do it day after day, not say anything. I remember my father had gout.
That hurt.
That hurts a lot. And he said, just get my foot into my shoe and I'll be fine.
Are you kidding? Wow. I wonder whether or not that is rooted in his fighting years. Remember when I first talked to you about this podcast, your face lit up. You talked to me right away about your father fighting for America in World War II. That is that fighting spirit.
Yeah, and work ethic, not necessarily for the fighting, but the spirit to be able to get up and go do things and get it done. I guess it's part of the immigrant experience or their work ethic, but certainly all I saw in my life.
Did he talk about his experience at all? For how long did he fight? Ever injured?
No, never. All I know is he was in the Pacific Theater and that was it.
Your dad never talked about fighting for America. How did you find out?
We have a plaque that says, thank you for your services in the United States Armed Forces. I don't have a single picture of my father. My cousins, they have pictures of their fathers in American uniforms.
I'm still trying to understand whether they're trying to protect you or it's too hard for them. They don't want to relive the experiences of war.
I would think a little of both. They came over for a better life and then they, have to fight a world war. I don't think that was what they wanted to do. So I think they just sort of put it out of their head. This is something I had to do. I came to the U.S. I have to fight for the U.S.
When you say your parents struggle and sacrifice, how about racial tension relations back then? Did you ever see anything that you wanted to fight for them if they couldn't fight for themselves?
I'd have to say Cambridge was very good about that. It was a little here and there, but nothing overtly racist. We had a lot of people helping us. They met a lot of people, politicians we knew that would help us smooth things out. It was still hard, but it wasn't too difficult.
Did you stand out as a Chinese kid or Asian kid or Oriental kid and being bullied, back in the 60s?
Yeah, there were only 4 Asian kids in the school where I went to school. Around my age, there were only 4 of us.
So you stood out.
We stood out, absolutely. But I didn't have any real bad experiences, but it was funny because my mother told me that when I went to preschool, that I only spoke Chinese.
So did you remember any difficulty in learning English and wanting to blend in and not wanting to show any signs of your Chinese roots?
I don't remember any of that growing up. I just assimilate. I think growing up here, I don't have the accent. The people that work at the restaurant say it's funny because they see I speak Toisanese with a Boston accent.
At what point in your life do you feel as if you're more motivated? Would it be now to sort of search your roots more so than ever before?
Absolutely. If we just sort of gloss over what happened and we don't find out, then the kids will never know what our parents and grandparents went through to come here. You can look up the history. You can take a course, read books, but I want to know about our history, our personal history. My aunt is still alive. My father's sister.
How old is she now?
102. She speaks only Toisanese. I can talk to her, but my Toisanese is not the best. So sometimes I have a hard time.
What has she told you so far?
I would just sit there and I'd listen. I'd listen to these stories about this one. Oh my God, he was always at the house eating our food. And this one, we lived in the same village and he was from the next house over. And, he was always a bad kid and get in trouble. And then he would run and he'd hide at our house. Those are the kind of stories that I would hear. It's hard to try to put things together. I didn't ask about how they came over. I don't know if it was just a way to make a living, to provide for their family. I know that my mother brought her entire family over.
I want to bring you back to 2013. After a Lunar Chinese New Year line parade through Harvard Square, ended up at the Hong Kong restaurant, you posed in a photo standing next to the plaque for your father. And you said your dad would absolutely love to see the celebration of a little Chinese culture with the kids. Well, tell me more.
I think that was the first year we have done the Lion Dance. The Harvard Square Business Association wanted to celebrate Chinese New Year. So we started in Harvard Square, and then we paraded back to the restaurant. And then we did things like lantern making. The kids learned calligraphy. There were Chinese performances, dance performances, martial arts performances. On the 3rd floor, there was arts and crafts for the kids on the 2nd floor. I thought that would be something good for the kids to see some of the Chinese culture.
That was the first year that Harvard Square ever did it, 2013, and that would have been 9 years after your father passed away. But you were able to say something about what your dad would have loved, right? So clearly that's a little bit of a regret, that meaning in his lifetime, there was no such thing. That he wasn't able to fully have the full blast of the Chinese culture on full display.
I don't know. I think he was probably more mad that the Red Sox never won the World Series while he was alive.
Well, let me ask you another question that may sort of pull you back to your younger self. We talked about growing up Asian American with feet in 2 worlds. It sounds like you didn't have 2 feet in 2 worlds. You have both feet in 1 world. Was it easier for you that way?
I think it was, really just jump into that assimilation. That's what we did. Obviously, our Chinese roots were something we did at home with family, but everything else was just assimilate.
That's interesting. Tell me more about what are some of the Chinese stuff that you do at home then.
Oh, well, with the baixian, because we used to do it.
You burn the incense.
We burn the incense and change the tea every day. I try to do it in the morning. It's just respect. This is guanyin, or this is your relatives. Gratitude, right? I think this is, hey, here's some more tea. Put the incense out. So that basically, to call them down, here, I put fresh tea out for you. And we always put the oranges out. We try to change them on the 15th and on the 1st of the month.
You never question why, you just follow the tradition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Since 10 years from the first time you have the Lunar New Year parade, Harvard Square has changed a lot in terms of people that come through, that live here, build businesses.
I think it's great. When I grew up, It was very homogeneous. There were very few Asians.
Puritanical white.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love it now. I love it. But they're from everywhere. The Asians, they're from China, they're from Canada, California, they're from all over the US. I've met people that are from small towns, Midwest. And it's like, how did you make your way here? Boston seemed like a fun place to be. And it was a little more multicultural than where they grew up.
Can we talk a little bit about whom you married and how you think about her roots and how that affect you in any ways?
Yeah, she's not Chinese. She's Japanese.
What's her name?
Renee and Amanda.
In terms of her cultural roots, do you see any roots finding on her part and how is that affecting you and vice versa?
She knows she's been to where her parents grew up, Kyushu. I've been to Tokyo, I've been all around Japan. But I want to say you come here, you're in the US, you assimilate.
Do you feel as if your effort to assimilate serves you very well?
Yes, but I think that comes at an expense of sort of losing some of that identity.
And at this time in your life, you feel as if the roots of your Chineseness are coming out more so?
I think I'm more curious about it. That's why we're doing the family tree and hearing stories from, at least from the Lee side of the family. As you get older, you think about not necessarily what's ahead of you, but look behind because you've gone so far, you've done so many things that you sort of reflect, what got me here? It's a lot of what my parents brought, that hard work. They did so much. They sacrificed so much for us that the least you can do is honor them.
As Paul said, as we get older, we think less about what's ahead and more about what's behind us. For me, I left behind my family in Hong Kong. My parents have passed away. Neither my older brother nor my younger sister chose to come to America, except me. I'm the only one. As I look back on my choices, it would not have been possible without my parents' support. They, too, worked very hard to make it possible for me to be free, to find my own way and build my own life here in America. What got me here? Their truly generous gift of love and freedom. The least I can do to honor them is to pass it on.
My parents operated a Chinese hand laundry because it was one of those few occupations that were open to Chinese back in those days, washing dirty clothes.
That is Fran Chin, a retired corporate immigration lawyer who grew up in Charlestown, Massachusetts. How did his parents' story and struggle affect his views on life and what's possible for him? Tune in to our next episode, the last Tuesday of July. Finally, let me share a podcast I discovered recently that I really enjoy. It's called Two Lives. The host is Laurel Morales, a former award-winning NPR reporter. Two Lives is a bi-weekly show about someone who faced darkness and how that moment transformed them. The title comes from the quote, "We all have two lives." The second begins the moment we realize we have only one. It's well-crafted and riveting. Two Lives has been featured on Apple Podcasts as a show we love, and it reaches about 10,000 listeners a month. One in a Billion Find Your Roots special series is made possible in part by a generous grant from the Phi Lambda Charitable Trust. We also rely on listeners like you to sustain our production. Please consider supporting our work with a donation. To donate, just go to our website at www.oneinaBillionVoices.org. Click Donate. Your donation is tax-deductible. One in a Billion is produced by our sound engineer and designer Brian Latwinowicz, and our lovely theme song is composed by Brad McCarthy.